The last thing my mother ever wrote was on the back of a deposit slip for a safe deposit box I did not even know she had. Her handwriting was shaky, the letters slanting downward as if she had fought to finish them. And the note said, "If Charlotte says the diamonds were stolen, contact a woman named Diane at First Fidelity. She'll know." 4 years later, that same Charlotte is serving 7 to 10 in state prison for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse. And that same safe deposit box now sits in a display case inside a vintage jewelry store called Gem of a Rat, beneath a brass plaque that spells out everything my sister tried to do. My name is Elise. I am 47 years old. For 14 years, I worked as a dental hygienist, the kind who could identify the exact submicron burr needed to clean a calcified root canal without glancing at the tray, the kind who kept an eagle-eye halogen headlamp and a roll of double-ended explorers in my purse, because I never knew when I would need to see fine detail under 20-power magnification. That steady hand, those tiny angled mirrors, and a complete unwillingness to let go of what was true became the only things that saved me when my older sister, Charlotte, attempted to frame me for a 6-figure jewelry heist that she had been orchestrating since before our mother died. I had moved back into the house we grew up in 3 years earlier, a 2-story colonial on a quiet street in Tucson, because Mom's Alzheimer's had reached the stage where she could forget to eat for an entire day, but could still recite every single hallmark on the diamond pieces our great-grandmother brought over from Antwerp in 1923. She would lift a brooch to the window light and say, "Belgian cut, early transitional, see that open cullet, Elise. They don't do that anymore. That's how you know it's real." I left my apartment, cut my clinic hours to 0, and became her full-time caregiver. Charlotte, who was 13 months older, had moved to Scottsdale a decade earlier and had visited 3 times in those 3 years, usually on her way to a spa weekend in Sedona, always with a sharp question about whether Mom had updated her will. Mom had been the quiet architect of our family's stability. She balanced a household budget that stretched a teacher's salary over 30 years and never carried a credit card balance in her life. When my father left when I was 12, she held us together with the ruthless precision of someone who knew that a single missed decimal could sink everything. That precision never left her, not even when the disease began to take her nouns and her faces. 2 weeks before she passed, she stared at me across the kitchen table and called me the one with the hands, and I did not know what she meant until much later. She died on a Tuesday in late March, just after the desert wildflowers had started to bloom. By Wednesday noon, Charlotte had already flown in from Scottsdale, her husband Mark trailing behind her like a suit full of impatience and expensive sandalwood cologne. I had not slept in 2 days. I was still wearing the same gray sweater I had on when the hospice nurse called time of death. Before the funeral home had even pressed Mom's dress, before I had chosen an urn, before anyone had shed a public tear, the vultures were circling. They did not mourn. They inventoried. Mark walked from room to room with a legal pad, tapping door frames and muttering about estate valuation, about square footage and comparables, while Charlotte made a beeline for the mahogany jewelry armoire in Mom's bedroom. I sat on the living room couch, numb, staring at a coffee mug with a chip in the rim, while Charlotte's heels clicked on the hardwood upstairs. Click, click, silence. Then her voice, sharp and performative and pitched to concerned daughter. "Elise, Elise, come up here. The diamonds are gone." The armoire was empty except for a few tarnished silver brooches and a strand of freshwater pearls that Mom had bought at a department store in the 90s. The 6 heirloom pieces, the 2-carat old European cut solitaire ring, the Belle Epoque diamond and sapphire bracelet, the pair of 3/4-carat chandelier earrings, the Art Deco bar brooch, the cushion-cut pendant on a platinum chain, and the antique lavalier necklace with the rose-cut accents were missing. The appraisal Mom had commissioned 5 years ago valued the collection at $185,000. Charlotte made a show of crawling on her knees to look under the bed, of opening the closet, of checking behind the dresser, while I stood frozen in the doorway. She called the insurance company from the upstairs hallway, her voice cracking just enough to sound convincing, and I remember staring at the back of her perfectly blown-out hair while she recited the policy number from memory. I do not recall her shedding a single tear. I do remember Mark, from across the landing, already calculating the deductible under his breath. An hour later, they began bagging up Mom's personal effects for donation. Charlotte moved through the house with a black contractor bag, tossing in sweaters, scarves, old greeting cards. She picked up a small music box from Mom's nightstand, the one with the chipped porcelain ballerina that had sat beside her bed since I was a little girl. It was a cheap thing, wood veneer over particle board, a gift from a long-dead aunt. Charlotte turned it over, shook it, and when it played 3 off-key notes of Fou or Elise, she snorted and dropped it into the bag. The ballerina's arm had been broken for decades. Mom had never thrown it away. Charlotte did not even hesitate. I did not say a word. I just nodded, compliant, foggy, a little sister too shattered to protest. But after they left for a late lunch at a steakhouse to discuss logistics, I fished the music box out of the trash bag and hid it in my overnight bag beneath a folded flannel. It was not sentiment, not exactly, not the kind Charlotte would mock at dinner later. It was a suspicion I could not yet articulate. Mom's hands had wound that music box every single night for 40 years, right after she took off her earrings, right before she turned out the lamp, even when the Alzheimer's had stolen the names of her own children. She would hold it, wind it, listen, and her eyes would go somewhere far away. I needed something of hers that Charlotte had not already priced. That night, locked in the guest bathroom with the water running so no one could hear me, I looked closer. The velvet lining on the bottom of the music box was loose, not glued down properly, and it did not sit flush with the base. I opened my purse and pulled out one of my dental explorers, a double-ended instrument with a fine, curved sickle tip I had used 1,000 times to detect calculus below the gum line. The tip was about 0.5 millimeter at its narrowest point, perfectly rigid, designed for precision prying. I slid it along the seam between the velvet and the wood, and the entire base panel lifted away like a lid, revealing a hollow compartment no thicker than a deck of cards. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, folded into a tiny square. When I unfolded it, I saw my mother's handwriting, shaky but legible, the same handwriting that had labeled every spice jar in the kitchen during the early stages of her illness, when she was still fighting to remember. "Elise," it began. "I knew Charlotte would come for the diamonds. She's been asking me about them since your father left. I moved the real collection in February to a place she cannot touch without you. Do not sign any papers she puts in front of you, no matter how kind she sounds. Do not trust her words. Trust your own eyes. If she tells anyone the pieces were stolen, call a woman named Diane at First Fidelity Trust. Ask for her specific extension. She knows everything. I love you. What you have in your hands is the only copy of this warning. Do not lose it." I sat on the cold bathroom tile, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and read those lines 5 times, tracing the uneven letters with my fingertip. The woman who, 2 weeks before, could not remember what day it was had built a counteroffensive so precise and so layered that it would take me the next 4 months to fully unravel it. She had known that her golden child was hollow. She had known that after her death, the reckoning would come, and she had left me a single thread to pull, and the name of someone who could teach me how. Before I continue this story, I want to know where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that some betrayals are so calculated they deserve their own prison sentence, hit that like button and subscribe. It is the only thing that reminds every Charlotte in the world that grief is not a cover for grand theft. Charlotte did not wait long. The very next morning, before the funeral arrangements were even finalized, she sat me down at the kitchen table with a stack of documents a half-inch thick, a notary public she had hired from a mobile law service, and a performance of sisterly tenderness so astoundingly well-acted that I almost bought it. She had set out 2 cups of tea, chamomile for me, Earl Grey for herself, and she folded her hands on the tabletop like a guidance counselor delivering difficult news. She explained, in a voice so soft and patient, that the insurance company needed a formal proof of loss statement to process the claim. Since I was named executor of the estate, I simply needed to sign a few forms stating that the items were indeed missing and that I accepted the settlement offer. Once I signed, she said, everything would be taken care of. I would never have to worry about the mortgage, about property taxes, about the upkeep on a house that was suddenly too big for one person. She would handle it all. She said the word handle 3 times. I looked down at the top sheet. The settlement amount was $150,000, the maximum payout under the homeowner's personal property rider after the $1,000 deductible. Beneath that, in dense, single-spaced paragraphs, was a release that transferred a limited power of attorney to Charlotte Voss for the purpose of depositing and managing the claim proceeds, as well as recovering any subsequently discovered assets. The language was knotted legal jargon designed to bury the truth. If I signed, I was swearing under penalty of perjury that the jewelry had been stolen from the residence on or about a specific date, which would authorize the insurance company to issue the check directly into an account controlled by Charlotte. If the pieces ever resurfaced, I would be the one on the hook for felony insurance fraud, not her. I would be the one who had made the false statement. She would be the helpful sister who simply facilitated the paperwork. I did not let any of that knowledge show on my face. I picked up the pen she had placed next to my teacup, a heavy Mont Blanc she must have brought in her purse, and I held it loosely, letting my fingers tremble. I blinked slowly, the way exhausted, grieving people blink, and I said, "Charlotte, I'm really struggling to absorb all this. My brain is just fog. Can we wait a few days? I need to be clear-headed before I sign something this important." I let my voice crack on the word clear-headed. I looked down at the floor. I was playing the role I needed to play, the broken little sister, too limp to resist, and I could feel her patience stretching thin across the table. Charlotte's smile tightened for exactly 1 millimeter, a micro-expression I caught because I was trained to watch for tiny movements in the tissues of the mouth. Then she smoothed it over and patted my hand and said, "Of course, sweetie. Take all the time you need. We just want to make this easy for you." Mark, who had been standing by the back door with his arms crossed, chimed in with a new pitch. He said they were worried about me being alone in this big house with all these memories. Why didn't I come stay in their guest suite for a while? It was beautiful this time of year. The pool was heated, they could handle all the meals, and I could sign the papers whenever I felt ready. He said the word ready like it was attached to a timer. I knew a control tactic when I saw one. I also knew that inside their home I would have easier access to the truth. I would be inside the perimeter where they felt safe, where they would let their guard down, where they would make mistakes. So I agreed. I called a few friends to pack up a couple boxes of my essentials. I left the house keys with a neighbor, and by Saturday afternoon I was installed in their backyard casita, a one-room guest house with a kitchenette and a sliding glass door that faced the turquoise rectangle of their swimming pool. I was the compliant little sister, too foggy to suspect a thing, and I unpacked my dental mirror, my headlamp, and the note from my dead mother, which I had sealed in a sandwich bag and hidden inside the lining of my suitcase. The first week, I just watched. Mark worked in what he described as commercial real estate, or at least that is what his LinkedIn profile listed under current positions. But I kept hearing him on the phone in his home office, voice low and corrosive, arguing with someone about missed payments, revolving credit lines, and a balloon clause that was coming due in 60 days. Charlotte would shush him whenever I walked past the hallway, and he would lower his voice to a hiss and then slam the door. They drove matching pearl-white luxury SUVs, but by the middle of the second week, the weekly cleaning crew that Charlotte had raved about stopped showing up, and I found a red disconnect notice from the water utility tucked under a stack of junk mail on the kitchen counter. The notice was dated 3 days after I moved in. The amount past due was $412, and the final shut-off date was circled in red ink. Meanwhile, a glossy black Steinway concert grand was delivered to their formal living room, a purchase that cost, according to the receipt I later found in the garbage, $12,700 before delivery fees. Charlotte had never learned to play the piano. She hired a tuner, she had the legs polished, and she posted an Instagram story of her manicured hand resting on the fallboard with a caption that said, "New baby." Mark booked a 10-day overwater bungalow in Bora Bora through a travel agent, the kind of trip that runs $25,000 with airfare, and I heard him put $2,000 down on a credit card that declined twice before it went through. They were hemorrhaging money they did not have, and I was their bailout, the scapegoat who would co-sign their escape from a mountain of debt they had built on the assumption that our mother's heirlooms would save them. The accident that opened the door came on a Tuesday afternoon, 10 days after I moved in. I was in their kitchen making myself a cup of peppermint tea, using the electric kettle on the counter, when I reached up to pull open the cabinet that held the mugs. The handle, a brushed nickel bar screwed into a cheap pot metal bracket, snapped clean off in my hand. The screws had sheared at the thread roots, leaving jagged stubs of shiny metal embedded in the particle board. Mark looked up from his laptop at the kitchen island, sighed heavily, and said, "Great, another thing to fix. I'll get a handyman next week." I saw my opening. I told him I could handle it, old habit from living alone, no need to pay a service call. He shrugged and went back to whatever spreadsheet he was staring at, and I began a methodical performance of household competence that was also a reconnaissance mission. I spent the next hour not just reattaching the handle, but deliberately taking my time. I borrowed a screw extractor from their toolbox in the garage, a cheap set with brittle bits, and I made 6 separate trips between the kitchen and the garage to establish a pattern of harmless puttering. On every trip, I passed by Mark's home office. The door was usually closed, but on my 4th pass, he had stepped out to take a call on the back patio, and the door had swung to a gap. I slipped inside. His office smelled of stale coffee and toner cartridges. On the wall hung a framed map of Scottsdale subdivided into colored parcels, and next to that a whiteboard covered in numbers that did not add up in the places I could see. The filing cabinet next to his desk was locked, a 2-drawer vertical cabinet with a keyed wafer lock, the kind you can find in any office supply store for $40. These locks have 4 or 5 spring-loaded wafers, flat pieces of metal with a rectangular cutout in the center, and they require a key with the correct bitting to lift each wafer to the shear line. I knew this because 6 years earlier, a patient had accidentally swallowed a tiny gold inlay that I had just fitted, and the dentist had locked the sterilizer cabinet with the replacement material inside while I was on break. The office manager could not find the key. I had watched a video online, bought a cheap pick set, and raked the lock open in 20 seconds. After that, I practiced. I had a steady hand and a tactile sensitivity refined by years of scraping subgingival calculus off living tooth roots, and lockpicking turned out to be just another way of listening with my fingertips. I always carried a small case in my purse, originally designed for a travel toothbrush, that now held a tension wrench I had filed from a windshield wiper insert, and a short hook pick I had shaped from a dental instrument blank. I could feel the subtle differences in pressure that indicated a pin or a wafer had set, and I could do it silently. I knelt beside the filing cabinet, rested the top drawer against my left knee to take up the slack, and inserted the tension wrench into the keyway, applying gentle, steady torque in the direction the key would turn. Then I slid the hook pick along the top of the wafers, raking them with a light bouncing motion that simulated the back-and-forth vibration of a key. Click, first wafer. Click, second. On the 3rd pass, the core rotated freely, and the drawer glided open with a soft, pneumatic sigh. The bottom drawer held hanging folders with printed labels: insurance correspondence, estate planning, legal, personal. I flipped to insurance first. Inside was a police report from the Scottsdale Police Department, case number stamped in blue ink at the top, filed 2 days before our mother died. The report described a residential burglary at Charlotte Voss's primary residence, in which a jewelry collection valued at $185,000 had been stolen. The listed items matched Mom's heirloom pieces exactly, piece by piece, down to the inclusion patterns described in a separate appraisal that was also in the folder. The address on the report was Charlotte's own house, not Mom's. She had staged a fake burglary in her own jurisdiction, filed a police report under penalty of perjury, and dated it before the actual loss, so that when she later claimed the jewels were stolen from Mom's house after the funeral, the insurance company would find a pre-existing loss in the clue database and deny the claim unless a specific supplementary process was followed, a process that required a notarized statement from the executor to reconcile the dates. That statement was what she had been trying to get me to sign at the kitchen table. She was layering a false trail, creating a paper maze that led to one exit: me, holding the pen. In the same folder was a certified gemological appraisal from a lab called Sonoran Gemological Services, signed by a man named Arthur Klein, GIA graduate gemologist. The appraisal was dated the same week as the police report. It listed the 6 heirloom pieces with inflated valuations, the solitaire ring marked at $45,000 alone, and included a note that the items had been examined and verified by the undersigned appraiser in the presence of the owner at a private residence. The owner was listed as Charlotte Voss, and her signature was at the bottom next to a thumbprint. She had brought a qualified appraiser to her own home, with the real pieces that she had already taken from Mom's jewelry box at some earlier visit, and she had created a legally sound paper trail that established her ownership weeks before the death. The betrayal had started long before the funeral. It had started while Mom was still alive and confused, while I was spoon-feeding her oatmeal in the kitchen, while Charlotte was somewhere in Scottsdale with a loop and a digital scale, opening a safe deposit box. I photographed every page with my phone, making sure the document edges and staple holes were visible. Then I slid the folder back into its exact position, relocked the cabinet, and wiped the keyhole with my sleeve to remove any brass dust that might have been displaced. I returned to the kitchen, finished installing the cabinet handle with an extra bracket I fabricated from a scrap of aluminum flashing I found in the garage, and used a 2-part epoxy that dried in 5 minutes, so good that the cabinet worked better than it ever had before. Mark never even looked up. That night, Charlotte and Mark attended a dinner party at a country club to maintain relationships, which I now understood meant pretending they were still solvent. I had the casita to myself. I put on a pot of coffee, retrieved my gear, and waited until I saw the glow of Mark's desktop through the sliding glass door. I had noticed something during my earlier snooping. Mark kept a sticky note on the underside of his keyboard with his login credentials. 10 minutes after they left, I let myself into the main house through the unlocked laundry room door. The computer was a Windows desktop with a 32-inch monitor, and the sticky note read simply Mark/Realty 2023, with no capital after the exclamation point. I logged in. The desktop background was a photo of the two of them on a beach, and the taskbar was cluttered with shortcuts for QuickBooks, a title escrow program, and 3 different banking portals. I opened the joint checking account at Desert Sky Credit Union first. The dashboard showed an average daily balance over the past 30 days of $89.32. The most recent transaction was an overdraft fee for $40. I clicked over to the credit card accounts. 3 separate cards from 2 different issuers, all linked to the same rewards program they clearly thought they were gaming. The combined balance on the 3 cards was $126,400, with utilization ratios above 95% on each. The minimum payments alone totaled over $3,000 a month. There was a recent deposit of $50,000 into the checking account, categorized as a loan disbursement, followed by a series of withdrawals that paid off the most urgent card minimums, and I noticed the Steinway delivery fee. The deposit came from a title loan on the newer of the 2 SUVs, a 2023 model that had been paid for in cash 3 months earlier. They were liquidating an asset they had already used to signal wealth, extracting the last bit of equity from a car that was now security for a triple-digit interest rate. But the key find was a scanned document in the Documents folder, filed under Safe Box. It was a rental agreement for a safe deposit box at Desert Sky Credit Union, box number 3147, opened in Charlotte's name on February 18th, 3 weeks before Mom died. The agreement listed Charlotte as the sole signatory and included a copy of her driver's license. I pulled out my phone and photographed the screen, zooming in on the signature, the date, the box number, and the branch address. Then I cleared the browser history, the recent documents list, and the clipboard, and I turned off the computer exactly as I had found it. I walked back to the casita in the dark, the pool lights reflecting green and blue on the stucco walls, and I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands shaking, because I now held enough evidence to destroy them. But I still did not know where the real diamonds were, and I still did not know who Diane was. I called First Fidelity Trust at 9 o'clock the next morning from the parking lot of a grocery store 2 miles away, during a trip Charlotte believed was for more tea and grief counseling. I asked for Diane, using the full extension from Mom's handwritten note. The receptionist transferred me twice, and then a crisp voice answered. Diane Havemeyer, Senior Compliance Officer, Wealth Management Division. This is a recorded line. Who am I speaking with? I said my mother's name, Iris, and then my own, and there was a pause that lasted 3 full seconds. Then Diane said, Your mother told me you would call. I'm so sorry for your loss. She was one of the most foresighted clients I've ever worked with. Do you have time to come in today? I drove to the First Fidelity building in downtown Phoenix, a high-rise of blue glass and polished granite, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. Diane was in her late 60s, silver hair in a sharp bob, a jacket the color of a winter sky, and she met me in the lobby with a firm handshake before leading me to a glass-walled office that overlooked the city and the distant brown hills. On her desk was a framed photograph of her grandchildren and a single sheet of paper face down. She turned it over. It was a certified trust document, dated February 6th, signed by my mother in the presence of a notary and a witness from the bank. The document established a dual-signature trust that held the 6 heirloom pieces in a high-security vault on the bank's 3rd sub-basement level. The trust was structured so that no one, not even a power of attorney or a court-appointed guardian, could access the items without both Charlotte and me physically present together, with biometric verification requiring a fingerprint scan and a real-time photo match against our state-issued ID. My mother had intentionally made us both necessary keys because she knew that Charlotte would never willingly cooperate with me unless forced, and that I would never cooperate with her unless I knew the full truth. But the trust had a second layer, a dead man's switch that Diane called the integrity clause. My mother had filed a notarized, time-stamped inventory with the bank that included high-resolution macro photographs of each piece, taken at 30-power magnification by a forensic gemologist the bank had recommended. Those photographs showed every inclusion, every feather, every pinpoint of trapped carbon inside the diamonds, which are as unique as fingerprints. The inventory proved that the real pieces had been in the bank's possession, inside this specific trust, continuously since February 6th, which rendered Charlotte's police report and the Klein appraisal impossible. If any insurance claim was filed on the jewelry without my explicit, separately notarized signature that was countersigned by a First Fidelity compliance officer, the trust would automatically freeze all assets, flag the transaction, and notify the bank's fraud investigation unit, and if the amount crossed federal thresholds, the FBI. My refusal to sign Charlotte's kitchen table release had already tripped the first alert. Diane had been waiting for my call for weeks. She leaned forward and asked me, very quietly, "What else have you found?" I showed her the photographs on my phone, the police report, the Klein appraisal, the safe deposit box rental agreement, the credit card balances, the title loan. She nodded slowly, wrote down case numbers and dates on a legal pad, and then explained the full architecture of the scheme. Charlotte and Mark had been running a classic staged loss insurance fraud, a variation of what investigators call a soft fraud with layered documentation. The Scottsdale police report was the first prong. It established a false date of loss in a jurisdiction that would not automatically cross-check with Tucson until the claim was already processed. The Klein appraisal was the second prong. It overvalued the pieces by at least 30% to inflate the claim, and also documented the items as being in Charlotte's possession at a specific time and place, creating a competing provenance. The third prong was the proof of loss statement they wanted me to sign, which would have created a chain of liability that ended with me, the executor who swore the items were gone. And the fourth prong, the end game, was the safe deposit box at Desert Sky. Charlotte planned to store the real pieces there temporarily, keep them hidden until the insurance check cleared, then fence them through an out-of-state auction house, and this was the elegant part, possibly even recover them 6 months later by claiming they had been abandoned at a pawn shop. If the insurance company recovered them, Charlotte would buy them back at a salvage rate, and she would still have $150,000 in liquid cash. She was playing both sides of the same con. Diane and I built the trap over the next 3 days. She contacted the insurance company's Special Investigations Unit, a department that handled complex fraud cases, and the SIU investigator, a woman named Reyes, already had the file flagged because of the conflicting police reports and the out-of-state date discrepancies. Diane fed them the evidence I had uncovered, and they agreed to proceed with a controlled interview, a setup in which Charlotte would be asked to bring me to the bank to finalize the claim with my signature. What Charlotte would not know was that the SIU would be there, that the subpoena for the safe deposit box rental records had already been issued, and that the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force had been alerted because the total potential loss, combined with the interstate elements, crossed the threshold for federal wire fraud. I just needed to maintain my fragile act for a few more days, and then get Charlotte and Mark to walk into a room full of people who already knew everything. But before that, I set my own test. My mother's note had said, "Save yourself." I needed to know whether there was any shred of human decency left inside my sister, or whether the woman I had grown up sharing a bedroom with was truly gone. I went to a theatrical costume shop in Temp and bought a small vial of stage blood, the viscous kind with a slightly bitter smell, and a breakable glass ampule that would shatter under my weight. I practiced my collapse in the mirror, watching my body crumple, timing the moment I would empty the ampule into my palm so the liquid would pool realistically. I wanted to see what she would do when she thought I was dying at her feet. The moment came on a Thursday afternoon, with Mark out at what he claimed was a meeting, but I suspected was a pawn shop. Charlotte and I were alone in the main house. I told her I had been feeling lightheaded, that I had not eaten, that my vision was swimming. She waved a hand toward the kitchen and said, "Have a banana." I waited until she was standing near the hallway, then I collapsed. I let my knees buckle, knocked a side table with my hip, sent a lamp crashing to the floor, and landed hard on my side on the travertine tile. The ampule inside my fist broke, and red liquid seeped out between my fingers and spread across the stone. I lay there, twitching slightly, my eyes open just a slit, making a low groaning sound that faded into silence. I was motionless, bathed in fake blood, my arm bent at an unnatural angle. Charlotte did not scream. She did not run to me. She did not pull out her phone to dial 911. She paused, her blue eyes cold and calculating, and she looked at my still body for maybe 4 seconds. Then she stepped over me. I heard the click of her heel on the tile right beside my ear, the swish of her linen pants, and then the rustle of fabric as she bent down not to check my pulse, but to pull my purse from the floor where it had fallen. I could not see her face, but I heard her hands rifling through the main compartment, unzipping the inner pocket, pulling out the manila folder that contained the unsigned insurance forms. And then she muttered, under her breath but perfectly audible, "Finally." That was the maximum cruelty beat. The moment every residual scrap of loyalty I had ever felt for my older sister evaporated into a cold, clarifying hatred that sat in my chest like a shard of black glass. I lay on that floor for another 2 minutes after she left the room, breathing through the metallic smell of stage blood. And then I got up, washed my hands in the kitchen sink, and packed my things. I was done being her victim. 48 hours later, Charlotte announced that the insurance adjuster had requested one final meeting at the bank, something about verifying the estate's accounts, and that I needed to be there with my identification. She phrased it like a favor, like she was helping me cross the finish line. We drove together in her white SUV, Mark in the back seat, both of them brimming with a barely contained greed that I could feel buzzing through the leather seats. The bank was Desert Sky Credit Union, the branch on Camelback Road, the same one where box 3147 was located. Charlotte had booked an appointment to access the safe deposit vault, believing that the meeting was the final step before the insurance check would clear, that she would retrieve the jewelry she had stashed, and that the whole house of cards would stand long enough for her to cash out. She had no idea what was waiting. We walked into the lobby, the air conditioning dry and sharp, the fake ficus trees dusted, the line of teller stations empty except for one woman who was not a teller. Diane stood near the vault entrance in a navy blazer, flanked by 2 plainclothes FBI agents, a uniformed Scottsdale police officer, and a woman in a charcoal suit who I recognized from the SIU intake photos as Investigator Reyes. The bank manager stood behind her, wringing his hands. The door to the safe deposit vault was open, and I could see the rows of small steel doors gleaming under fluorescent light. Charlotte's smile didn't falter immediately. She walked toward the vault with her purse clutched under her arm, saying something about having the key. But then she saw Diane, and she saw the badges, and her pace slowed. Mark, behind her, stopped so abruptly that his leather-soled shoes squeaked on the polished floor. The assistant manager asked us to step to the side and produce our identification for the box access. Charlotte handed over her driver's license with a hand that was suddenly trembling. I did not move. When the manager asked for my signature to confirm the co-access request, I looked directly at Charlotte, my voice completely steady, and I said, "I will not sign anything. The jewelry was never stolen. It is in a trust you cannot touch, and every lie you have told is about to send you to prison." She opened her mouth to say something, maybe to call me unstable, but Investigator Reyes was already handing her a manila envelope containing copies of the Scottsdale police report, the Klein appraisal, the safe deposit box rental agreement, and the macro photographs from the First Fidelity Trust. Charlotte's face went white, and then red, and then she began to scream about her rights, about power of attorney, about how this was all a misunderstanding. Mark lunged forward, maybe to grab the forms, maybe to stop her mouth, but one of the agents already had his arm behind his back, and a second agent was reading Charlotte her Miranda rights in a calm, professional monotone as the officer clicked the handcuffs around her wrists. She was arrested on the spot, booked on charges of insurance fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and when the pre-death police report was factored in, elder financial abuse because the scheme had been initiated while our mother was still a vulnerable adult. Mark was charged with conspiracy and accessory after the fact. The gemologist Arthur Klein was picked up later that week, his files seized, his license suspended, his own little empire of inflated appraisals unraveling in the investigation's wake. The trial took 11 months. I testified for 6 hours, walking the jury through every step of my investigation, the lock-picking technique, the dental tools, the macro photographs, the financial records, the staged collapse and the step-over video that the bank's CCTV had captured in perfect, damning clarity. The prosecutor played the footage on a large courtroom monitor. Me, crumpled on the travertine, the red stains spreading, Charlotte stepping over my body, bending for my purse, mouthing the word finally. The jury was back in 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Charlotte was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in state prison, plus 5 years supervised release, and ordered to pay full restitution of $185,000, the true value of the heirlooms, plus punitive damages that covered my legal fees with compensation left over for emotional distress. Mark pleaded out to lesser charges in exchange for testimony and received 18 months with 3 years supervised release. The Sedona vacation home, which had been purchased with the insurance check that never should have been issued, was seized by the court under the Crime Victims Reparations Act and transferred to me as partial restitution. The insurance company also pursued a subrogation clawback against Charlotte personally, freezing any remaining assets she had hidden in shell accounts, and I eventually received the full value of the pieces from the insurer's recovery action. I used the restitution to open a small vintage jewelry store in a converted craftsman bungalow downtown, a place with wide plank floors and a bay window that catches the morning light. I named it Gem of a Rat, with a logo I designed myself. A grinning rodent holding a 2-carat diamond between its teeth, the stone rendered with tiny internal fractures that echo the inclusion map of our mother's solitaire ring. Inside the store, I built a custom display case using salvaged walnut and museum-grade LED lighting, and inside that case sit the 6 original heirloom pieces, not for sale, each one mounted on a velvet bust and accompanied by a detailed brass plaque that recounts what my sister attempted, what our mother predicted, and how a steady-handed dental hygienist with a lock pick and a dead woman's note dismantled an entire conspiracy. The plaques list Charlotte's full name, her case number, her conviction date, and the sentence she is currently serving. People come in just to read them. Some stay for an hour, reading every line and pressing their faces to the glass. Sometimes they buy an estate ring or a pair of deco earrings from the adjacent cases, and sometimes they just leave a 5-star review that says, Karma. The Sedona vacation home I leased to a property management firm, and the net rental income funds a scholarship program I established through the American Gem Society for appraiser ethics certification. Every year I receive letters from young gemologists, newly licensed, who write to tell me that they learned about integrity and professional boundaries because of fraudster's beach house money paid for their exam and their continuing education. The music box that Charlotte threw away now sits on my own nightstand, the false bottom removed and the note laminated in a small frame, so that I can read my mother's warning whenever I need a reminder that some debts come in the form of family, and you do not owe them a single dime. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single story, and if you want more tales of ordinary people outsmarting the worst of what was supposed to be love, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I will see you in the next one.